Ever stop to think about the unseen currents shaping what we believe, what we want, even what we do every single day?
Yeah, it almost sounds a bit like, magic or something hidden.
Right. But what if these forces are very real, very deliberate, and have been studied and applied for almost a century now?
Well, that's exactly what we're digging into today. We're about to take a fascinating journey into this realm, exploring the ideas of Edward Bernays, laid out in his 1928 book, Propaganda.
Propaganda. That word itself,
Uh,
it definitely brings up some negative images, doesn't it? Manipulation, maybe?
it often does. But Bernays, who was actually Sigmund Freud's nephew, interestingly enough, offered a much broader perspective. He saw propaganda as, well, a potent tool for influencing public opinion across all parts of society.
Exactly. And that's really the core of this deep dive. We're not, looking at conspiracy theories here.
No, not at all.
We're going straight to Bernays' own arguments, pulled right from his book, to understand how this powerful force operates within the very structure of our world.
And for those of you listening who want to get informed quickly, get a solid grasp of things, this exploration should give you some, well, surprising insights without getting bogged down in, like, heavy academic speak.
Okay, so let's set the scene.
Yeah.
Where did these ideas even come from? It's kind of amazing to think that just over 100 years ago, the whole idea of consciously shaping public opinion was seen as, well, not very respectable.
Definitely not. It was sort of associated with patent medicines, maybe vaudeville acts, shadier parts of commerce.
Right, the Wild West of persuasion, almost.
Mhm.
Trying to manage what people thought was seen as a bit, underhanded by a lot of folks.
Precisely. Before World War I, advertising and what we might now call early PR, they weren't exactly held in high esteem.
People were suspicious.
Yeah, the social elite often looked down on those involved. Public relations, such as it was seen as something maybe for the entertainment industry, but not for serious business or politics.
But then the First World War changed everything. That allied effort to build support.
Wow.
Wow, it was incredibly effective.
It really was, and that success, that demonstration of how you could actually mold public opinion on a massive scale, well, that shifted the whole landscape.
Suddenly, the business of public persuasion gained a kind of legitimacy it never had before.
Absolutely. The triumph of wartime propaganda was a revelation, especially for big business. Yeah. They saw that the very same techniques used to get people behind the war effort could work just as well for selling products.
Or shaping how people viewed corporations themselves.
Exactly. Big players like General Motors, Procter & Gamble, General Electric, they were quick to start adopting these methods.
And that period after the war, leading up to the crash in '29, that was a real boom time for this peacetime propaganda, wasn't it?
Oh, hugely. There was this real sense of high excitement. And these new professionals, as they saw themselves, they weren't just thinking about profits.
No.
Many
Okay.
genuinely believed they were using a powerful new science that could actually improve society.
Improve society how?
Well, there was this sense of almost missionary zeal. They felt they weren't just selling stuff, they were promoting a vision of national progress, mainly through, increased consumption.
Right, the idea that buying more things was somehow patriotic or civilizing.
Sort of, yeah. They argued that by skillfully guiding purchasing habits, they could elevate the nation, even civilize immigrant populations through consumerism.
Yeah.
You even had books back then like Calkin's Business the Civilizer.
This was the civilizer, wow.
Yeah, and Barton's The Man Nobody Knows. They were essentially propaganda for propaganda, arguing it was a positive force.
And Walter Lippmann's phrase, the manufacture of consent, really seemed to capture that shift.
It did. It became accepted quite quickly, this idea that you needed to actively shape what the public thought. Businesses, politicians, all sorts of institutions jumped on board.
So a key takeaway there is how those wartime techniques became powerful tools for shaping peacetime life, consumption, social norms.
But here's the twist, the paradox. Even as propaganda became more effective, more widely used, the word itself started to get a bad rap.
Because of the war.
Exactly. Its heavy use against the enemy left a kind of sour taste. George Creel, who ran the U.S. propaganda effort during the war, even noted that the Germans associated the word propaganda purely with lies and deceit.
So the success kind of backfired on the term itself. Which brings us back to Bernays' book.
Right. Propaganda, the book, really looks like a deliberate attempt to rescue the word, to give it a more respectable, maybe even intellectual framing.
He wanted to clean it up.
He saw himself as both a truth seeker and a propagandist for propaganda. He genuinely seemed to believe the term was intellectually necessary. For him, no other word really captured the process accurately.
But it wasn't just an academic exercise, was it? Our sources point out something else.
No, definitely not. And this is crucial. Propaganda was also very clearly a strategic sales pitch
A sales pitch for?
for Bernays himself,
Fraud.
for his expertise for the whole field of public relations as he was defining it and practicing it.
Ah, okay. So while it reads like an objective overview, the target audience was really potential corporate clients.
That seems very likely. He wanted to show them the power, the value of what he could do. And notice how he keeps using us throughout the book.
Yeah. What's that about?
It's subtle, right? It kind of implies that he, too, is just one of the masses being influenced, which maybe downplays his own role as one of the actual influencers, one of the propagandists.
That's clever. And what about those lists of examples he uses, like the Aryan Singing Society and the National Nut News? They seem a bit random.
They do, don't they? And that might also be strategic. By including these smaller, maybe less obviously powerful examples alongside big business, it creates an impression
What kind of impression?
that propaganda is just this widespread, almost natural thing happening everywhere from all sorts of groups rather than something heavily driven by, powerful corporate interests.
That kind of dilutes the focus on big money and power.
Potentially, yes. And the later chapters on education, social service, art, science, they also seem aimed at broadening the book's appeal, making it look like a more comprehensive study of societal influence, not just a business tool.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. When we think about propagandists, maybe we imagine someone detached, coolly manipulating things. But is that always the case? Especially for those who really stir things up.
It's an interesting contrast, the idea of the detached manipulator versus, well, the reality of many historical agitators. Think about figures like Hitler, Goebbels, Mussolini, even someone like McCarthy.
They weren't exactly detached.
Far from it. While they absolutely manipulated information, they also seem to have this fiery core of commitment, almost a fanatical belief in their cause. That deep conviction was often key to their ability to ignite mass reactions.
But there's a difference in the type of influence too, right? Like an immediate, explosive reaction versus something slower.
Exactly. An agitator might want an instant, powerful response, but advertising, public relations, they often aim for more gradual, dispersed effects, shaping habits, preferences, opinions over time, almost without you noticing.
Like the example our sources mentioned about bacon.
Yes, that's a classic Bernays example, though maybe more apocryphal. Instead of just shouting, "Eat more bacon," the idea was to get doctors' trusted figures to recommend hearty breakfasts, which would naturally include bacon. It's indirect, methodical.
Leveraging authority figures. Interesting. Now, what about ethics? Did Bernays have any limits?
Well, the sources mention he reportedly drew the line at promoting cigarette smoking, which was becoming a big public relations area at the time.
Okay, but that raises a bigger question, doesn't it? If propaganda is so powerful, especially corporate propaganda, how does a difficult truth, maybe a costly one, actually get out?
That's a really critical point. Look at the history of smoking. Early warnings about the dangers were actively suppressed for decades by tobacco industry propaganda.
Even though some journalists were trying to report on it.
Right. People like George Seld were ringing alarm bells early on, but they were drowned out. It makes you think about other underreported threats, maybe around environmental issues or health concerns today.
And if investigative journalism, muckraking, tries to uncover those truths,
It often finds itself directly opposing the narratives pushed by powerful propagandists, which might explain why Bernays apparently had a pretty dim view of muckraking journalism.
it didn't fit his model of smoothly managing public opinion.
Pretty much. His, let's say, sanguine view of big business and his sophisticated justifications for propaganda definitely drew criticism. But you have to remember his main audience.
The potential clients.
Exactly, the people and companies who could afford his services and saw the value in what he offered.
So here's that paradox again. People become maybe more aware, more skeptical of propaganda.
Yet its actual use becomes more widespread, more sophisticated. Even if you distrust it, its techniques are being refined and used more pervasively.
The very groups causing suspicion get better at managing that suspicion.
It's a fascinating dynamic. The effectiveness became undeniable, so its use spread, even among those who might have initially disliked the whole idea.
Okay, let's really dig into one of Bernays' biggest ideas, the invisible government. It sounds dramatic, maybe even a bit conspiratorial. What did he mean?
Well, right in the first chapter of Propaganda, he talks about the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses.
Conscious and intelligent manipulation.
Yes. And he argues this isn't just happening, but it's actually, quote, an important element in democratic society. The people doing this manipulating, he says, make up an invisible government that holds the real ruling power.
The real power, not elected officials.
That's his argument, that we are governed, our minds molded, our tastes formed, largely by people we've never heard of.
That is, yeah, a bit unsettling. So it's not necessarily a secret cabal.
Not exactly like that. He saw it more as a natural result of how complex democratic societies have to organize themselves. You have millions of people. You need some way to organize thought and action.
So direction is inevitable.
That's his view. And these invisible governors, as he calls them, might not even know each other or be coordinating in some grand conspiracy. They exert influence through natural leadership, through the power of their ideas or their position in society.
He uses the example of political parties, right? How they weren't in the original plan but emerged naturally.
Exactly. Voters needed organization to make their votes count, so parties arose. It's about the necessity of structure in a mass society.
And technology plays a huge role here.
Oh, absolutely. The press, railroads, telephone, radio, airplanes, all these things dramatically sped up how fast ideas could spread and how many people they could reach. Bernays quotes H.G. Wells on this.
Making influence much more efficient.
Right. Ideas could now reach far beyond just a local community.
And the sheer number of groups in society. It's kind of mind-boggling when you think about it. The sources mentioned the World Almanac.
Yeah, hundreds of organizations just under the letter A. Everything from the League to Abolish Capital Punishment to the National Association of Accordion Wholesalers or whatever, and tens of thousands of newspapers and magazines listed elsewhere.
Even really niche ones with huge readerships, like that Livestock Producer magazine.
What's amazing isn't just the number, but how these groups represent all the different cleavages in society, social, political, economic, religious, hobbies, you name it. And information, opinions, they flow through these channels carrying authority within specific groups.
It's not just formal organizations, is it? He talks about less formal stuff, too.
Right, like bridge clubs, sororities, local community groups. Opinions get shaped and shared there, too. He even uses that funny satirical quote from Life magazine about the endless list of societies in America.
It really drives home the point about how many overlapping groups we all belong to.
Exactly. You might be in a professional group, a church, a political party, a book club, all at once. And an idea you pick up in one group can easily spread to the others you're part of.
So this whole web, this invisible intertwining structure, as he puts it, that's how democracy organizes its collective mind.
That's Bernays' argument. It's the mechanism for organizing group thought in a large society. He felt imagining a society without something like this was just unrealistic.
Okay, so if that's the structure, what about the new propaganda he talks about? How is it different from older forms of persuasion?
He contrasts it with older top-down power. Think Louis XIV saying, "L'État c'est moi, I am the state."
Right. Absolute power.
Then comes the Industrial Revolution steam engine, printing press, public schools, which empowers the masses, shifts power towards the people. But Bernays argues this created a new situation.
Which was?
Minorities, smaller groups discovered they could use propaganda to influence and guide the newly empowered majority.
So as power diffused, propaganda became the tool to steer it. He even calls it inevitable now, right? The executive arm of the invisible government.
That's the phrase. A very strong claim. And proponents framed this new propaganda very positively as necessary, even beneficial, for navigating modern complexity.
He uses that hypothetical example of the New York Times front page.
Yeah, suggesting that maybe half the stories aren't just spontaneous news, but are actually, well, propaganda. Carefully shaped events or announcements designed to influence the public. It really makes you pause and think about the news you consume.
Definitely makes you look twice. So how did he actually define this modern propaganda?
He called it a consistent, enduring effort to create or shape events to influence the relations of the public to an enterprise, idea, or group.
So it's not just saying things, it's doing things, creating events.
Exactly. It's about actively managing perceptions and realities to achieve a specific goal, whether that's building a cathedral, electing a president, or selling soap.
And he compares its power to how an army regiments soldiers. That's intense.
It really highlights the potential for coordinated, pervasive influence on how people think. He also talks about using group stereotypes, how leaders can tap into existing prejudices or beliefs, citing the example of the KKK leader appealing to certain sentiments.
And his point is that everyone needs public approval now, even charities.
Pretty much. In modern society, he argues, you can't undertake any large-scale project without public support, or at least acceptance. So even nonprofits need propaganda, in his view, to get their message out and gain support.
So the takeaway is propaganda is everywhere, on all sides, and just getting more efficient.
That's the picture he paints, which leads directly to the next question. Who are these people doing the shaping? Who are the new propagandists?
Right. Who does Bernays say they are? It's not just the famous faces, the politicians and CEOs we see all the time.
No, he argues that while those public figures have influence, they're often guided by people working behind the scenes, lesser-known figures.
There they go.
Think of a local political boss advising a senator, or maybe a higher-up religious authority guiding a bishop. He calls them wire pullers. They might not be household names, but they hold significant sway.
He even talks about dictators in other fields, like fashion.
Yeah, the examples of Irene Castle making bobbed hair popular or Paris fashion houses setting skirt lengths. It shows how even things that seem like personal choices, like your hairstyle or clothes, can be heavily influenced by these unseen authorities.
It really pulls back the curtain. That detailed example of the London tailor influencing American suit styles.
It shows the whole chain, right? From the elite tailor to the manufacturers to the retailers and finally to the guy buying the suit, thinking he's making an independent choice.
And the silk manufacturers getting shoe companies to push silk shoes.
Yeah.
It's all about creating demand, orchestrating trends.
Exactly. Engineering desire from behind the scenes. It's quite revealing when you realize how many preferences might be, well, subtly manufactured.
So why is this invisible government concentrated, according to him?
Simple answer. Money. He argues it's expensive to effectively manipulate public opinion on a large scale. So, power tends to concentrate among those who can afford it.
And this leads to the rise of a specialist.
The Public Relations Counsel, yes. This is the expert who interprets the client, whether it's a company, an idea, a cause to the public, and also interprets the public back to the client.
So they're a kind of bridge. Or maybe a translator.
Both, really. Their role is complex. First, they analyze the client and the public they need to reach. Then, crucially, they help shape the client's actions and policies so they'll actually resonate positively.
So it's not just spin. It starts with the substance.
Ideally, yes. Bernays emphasizes that. It's about making sure the client has something valuable or presents their case in a way that aligns with public interest before you even start communicating broadly. Then you use all the tools, press, radio, events, etc.
So they need to understand both sides deeply.
Absolutely. They analyze, advise on policy, then communicate. The examples he gives are good illustrations.
Like the orphan asylum changing its housing model.
Right. Switching to a cottage plan to seem less institutional and more humane, responding to public sentiment. Or the railroad launching a super fast, prestigious train, not just for transport, but for image, for prestige.
It shows how PR influences the actual actions of the client, not just the words.
Exactly. And historically, he notes, this field really grew after things like the big insurance scandals in the early 1900s. Companies realized, uh-oh, we don't understand the public and they don't trust us. We need help.
And it's an ongoing thing, right? Not just a one-off campaign.
He stresses that effective PR is continuous. You're always monitoring public opinion, countering rumors, building relationships, building trust over the long haul.
Does he mention ethics in this role?
He does. He talks about developing a professional code, like in law or medicine. This includes refusing clients who are dishonest or pushing harmful things and being transparent about who is behind the message.
Candor is important.
He argues it has to be, because deceiving the public ultimately backfires and hurts the credibility of the counsel and the field itself.
Okay, this ties into the psychology of public relations. Bernays was Freud's nephew, so psychology was clearly important to him. How did it shape this new propaganda?
Hugely important. He drew heavily on the work of early mass psychologists, people like Trotter, Le Bon, Wallace, Lippmann. They were showing that groups behave differently than individuals.
That's so.
Well, group actions are often driven more by shared emotions, instincts, subconscious drives, rather than pure logic or rational thought. The group mind has its own characteristics.
And Bernays saw an opportunity there.
Exactly. The question became, if we understand these group dynamics, these psychological triggers, can we subtly guide the masses, maybe even without them realizing it?
Can we control them?
He believed propaganda had shown it was possible, at least to a degree. He uses that analogy of driving a car, understand the mechanism, the psychology, and you can steer public opinion.
But he admits it's not an exact science.
Right, because you're dealing with humans, not machines. There's always unpredictability. But he believed that understanding the fundamental desires of people, that's the key. That's the steam, he says, that makes the social machinery work.
So the old way was just repetition, hammering the message.
Kind of. The older propaganda often relied on a simpler, mechanistic view, repeat the stimulus, get the response, like those old ads just saying, eat more bacon, over and over.
But the new propaganda, using psychology.
It's much more sophisticated. It focuses on the group structure, on identifying and influencing the leaders within groups. So instead of yelling, eat bacon, you get doctors, trusted authorities to recommend hearty breakfasts.
Targeting the influencers.
Precisely. It's about understanding the existing currents of belief and authority and tapping into them.
Like selling pianos by selling the idea of a music room.
Exactly. You don't just advertise pianos, you create a desire for a certain kind of aspirational lifestyle. Maybe associate pianos with architects, interior designers, respected cultural figures. You make the piano seem like a necessary part of that desirable picture. You remove the sales resistance subtly.
It's about association. Like the Jackson Heights example.
Perfect example. The real estate development didn't just sell apartments. They organized benefit performances, built a golf course, had a post office opening. They associated the place with prestige, community, desirable activities.
And the ivory soap sculptures.
Another classic. Engage school children, museums, respected sculptors. Link the soap not just to cleanliness, but to creativity, art, education. It elevates the product through association.
But he makes a key point. The leaders or groups you approach have to see a benefit for themselves, right?
Absolutely crucial. Propaganda only works if it aligns with the existing interests of the group or leader you're trying to influence. The propagandist has to find that overlap, that mutual benefit.
Like the artists and educators supporting the soap carving because it promoted art education.
Exactly. It served their goals too. So effective propaganda isn't just pushing your message. It's about understanding others' motivations and finding common ground, creating connections.
So wrapping this up, it's really clear from our deep dive into Bernays that propaganda, his way, is much more than just, lies or spin.
Definitely. It's a complex, subtle, and pretty powerful force shaping our world by managing public opinion, by understanding group psychology.
And this invisible government he described, it really does operate in so many parts of our lives, doesn't it? From what we buy to what we consider normal or acceptable.
Yeah, often working just beneath the surface of our everyday awareness. It's a system built on understanding how groups think and strategically engaging with those who hold influence within them.
Which leaves us with a final thought, maybe a challenge for you listening. Considering how pervasive these persuasive forces are and how they keep evolving, how can we become more conscious, more discerning consumers of all the information and influence coming at us daily?
It really pushes you to think more critically about the sources you encounter, doesn't it? To ask, what are the underlying motivations behind the messages we receive? Who benefits? It's something worth reflecting on.